23 decades of oil drilling in the Ecuadorian Amazon, Chevron dumped more than 18 billion gallons of toxic wastewater. I've got a nice image to show you. It's going to come up on the screen here pretty soon. Right into the rainforest, poisoning local children to death and unleashing a wave of cancers, miscarriages, and birth defects. Currently, Chevron is trying to make an example of Steve Donziger, the human rights lawyer who won the 2011 case against Chevron in the Ecuadorian court. Donziger is a U.S. attorney and a classmate of Barack Obama at Harvard Law. He gave up literally everything to take on the indigenous Ecuadorians case in which Chevron was ordered to pay the indigenous plaintiffs $9.5 billion. So Chevron vuole fare una vendetta, which means they want to make a vendetta. Their case against Steven Donziger has some very dangerous implications when it comes to the United States' slide into corporate totalitarianism. We'll get to that. But first, some background on the whole Chevron in the rainforest story, brought to you by our guest today, investigative reporter Greg Palast. Palast has covered the oil industry worldwide for The Guardian newspaper in Britain. And for BBC TV, he's investigated Chevron's polluting the Ecuadorian rainforest ever since they started polluting it. Oh, no, that was probably before. Anyway, Greg Palast himself was targeted by Chevron because it was he who broke the story that Chevron had knowingly destroyed key evidence, which is also known as fraud. Here's the piece Greg produced for the BBC for some context and some history.
We're flying past the snow-capped volcanoes of the Andes into the Amazon rainforest for the rumble in the jungle, the biggest environmental slugfest in world history. This is the battleground, the rainforest of Ecuador, as large as England, where the Amazon's waters begin their 4,000-mile journey to the ocean. To find Chevron's opponents, you need to take a little boat ride. Deep in the rainforest are the Cofan Indians. No one knows how many thousands of years they've been here, living off what they could hunt, fish, and craft from the river and jungle.
We use this to carry yuca, banana, corn, and little animals we hunt. In the old days, we hunted with blowpipes. Now I have a shotgun.
Their main meal used to be monkey, but today's menu is chicken. In 1972, a helicopter landed and everything changed. Chief Emergildo Criollo says the oil company obtained permission to drill from the Cofan, speaking in Spanish, which the Indians didn't understand.
They give us candy, sugar, diesel fuel, and cheese. The cheese smelled funny. We threw it into the jungle. They say we could rub oil on our skin to cure aches and pains.
Oh, so they told you that if you put oil on your skin, it would make you better?
Sí, eso dijo, sí.
Speaking in Cofan, Cecilia Kenama said she lost a daughter to the pollution. I asked her why she blamed the oil companies.
Many children have died of strange new diseases only since the drilling began.
I lost 2 sons. My 3-year-old went swimming and began to vomit blood.
The Cofan say the damage to their health was caused by Chevron Texaco. Chevron says that's nonsense. Let's go find out. Ooh. This pit is the result of an accidental puncture to a wellhead. Now, Texaco said that when it was operating these wells, you didn't have many of these accidents. But that's maybe because of this. It says personal and confidential. It says reports are to be removed from the field division offices and destroyed. Like that. If you were here with me, you could smell it. Yum. The co-fans say this is standard operating procedure. They drink this stuff. They swim in it. And they breathe it. In Texas, they call this sky dumping. That's not Chevron smoke. It's Ecuador's own state oil company, Petroecuador. Chevron's long gone. I can't show you all the leaking pits. There are over 200 on the lands of the Indians and settlers. Like this one. Most people would be thrilled to find oil on their property, but not Manuel Salinas. All he's got out of it, he says, is an empty oil drum, pustules all over his arms, and a stomach ailment slowly eating him alive.
I suffered these terrible, terrible rashes. It feels like my head is splitting apart.
And it's back over the Andes volcanoes, to the other side of the mountain, for the other side of the story. Now it's Chevron's turn. Satanic polluter or innocent victim? Let's ask him.
Scientifically, nobody proved that crude causes cancer. Okay?
I asked Chevron's lawyers about the rising number of cancers among Indian children.
Did they show you a medical certificate?
No.
And it's the only case of cancer in the world? How many cases of children with cancer you have in the States, in Europe, in Quito? If there is somebody with cancer there, first they have to prove that it's caused by crude or by petroleum industry. And second, they have to prove that it is our crude, which is absolutely impossible.
So the Indians are attempting to do the impossible. They've put on war paint and feathers, and heavily armed with lawyers, they are filing a new lawsuit. They are demanding no less than $12 billion from Chevron Texaco to clean up their forest. A bunch of natives in feathers in the jungle demanding $12 billion from an international oil company would be just a sad joke. But across the Andes, in Ecuador's capital, something happened which changed everything. An uprising of indigenous tribes and urban poor, when I was here 2 years ago, forced the president to flee out the back door of the presidential palace. In new elections, the left whips George Bush's allies with the campaign theme song, the 1980s Twisted Sister hit, "We're Not Gonna Take It Anymore." The newly elected president, Rafael Correa, told me Ecuador is no longer for sale, and he defended kicking out U.S. oil giant Oxy Petroleum. As soon as Correa won, he flew to Saudi Arabia to rejoin the OPEC cartel. And he told George Bush to shut down the U.S. military base in Ecuador unless Bush gave Ecuador a base in Florida. Behind Little Ecuador is Big Venezuela, and its larger-than-life leader, Hugo Chavez.
Buenos días a toda Venezuela.
Chavez has given Ecuador help worth millions of dollars and the political weapons to stand up to George Bush. But Chevron has a few friends in Washington. U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice served on Chevron's corporate board for 10 years and is the only member of George Bush's cabinet who can carry 30 million gallons of crude oil. Chevron named a supertanker after her. Now, Chavez stands with Ecuador's leaders, and Ecuador's leaders are standing with those suing Chevron. Back in Quito, we caught up with the man who designed Ecuador's new alliance with Chavez, who this week becomes president of Ecuador's new National Assembly. And he's architect of the plan to return Ecuador to OPEC and take down the U.S. oil companies like Chevron. Assembly President Alberto Acosta. I asked him about Chevron's treatment of the Indians.
Chevron is responsible for the environmental and social destruction in the Amazon, and that's why they're on trial.
What if every small nation on the planet sued big oil companies, big U.S. oil companies, for damage created years ago? Wouldn't that bring the entire worldwide oil industry to a stop?
What we should ask is not whether that will create chaos in the oil industry, but whether the oil industry is creating chaos in the world.
What about his new alliance with Hugo Chavez?
We don't have an imperialist relationship with Venezuela. We're brother countries building a whole new Latin America.
The conflict between Indians and Chevron is becoming a battlefield in the war between Bush and Chavez. Not everyone's happy about the new oil order. One dissenter asked us to meet him at the Hotel Quito.
Si tú me miras.
Salud. Salud. Salud.
This drink is called the Spirit of Ecuador.
That's good.
Fabian Losa is relaxing after a long day as Ecuador's top television newscaster. Do you think Acosta's demands on Chevron and the oil companies are demagoguery, are just
No, I think it's more dangerous. I think Acosta hates the United States, hates Occidental. He loves socialists. He loves Chavez. He loves Cuba. He don't like a petroleum company. You know, Acosta is very, very left. And he is the new president of Assembly.
He raises questions about the environmentalists suing Chevron.
Environment activists people are communists in the past. Now they are over green but red down, like a sandia. What's the meaning in English, Fred?
Right, like a watermelon.
Red. Yeah, watermelon.
Green on the outside, red on the inside. As we left, the oil minister of the old regime waved goodbye, and I headed off to the jungle to meet one of these so-called watermelons. This is the COFAN's lawyer for their last filing, 27-year-old Julio Prieto. He describes the difference between his legal team and Chevron Texaco's.
Here come us, in one yellow cap, 2 lawyers and one technician. Here they come, Texaco's convoy, with 10 big white trucks, and I don't know, at least 4 of them are full of bodyguards, well-armed bodyguards, because they still thinking that we're dangerous around here.
I asked him why he's not suing Ecuador's own oil company.
Isn't it easy to blame the big rich gringos who left the country 15 years ago, and it's a mess right now?
Petroecuador has done bad. Now we are thinking about suing Petroecuador too, but that's not an excuse for Texaco to go away.
And that really burns up the lawyers for the American companies.
Yeah. So they're looking for deep pockets. Simply as that. That's all what they want.
They're just going after rich gringos.
Exactly. Yeah.
There you go.
It's the largest fraud in the history.
Is Chevron Texaco just an easy target for lawyers backed by the new oil-charged politicians of South America? Or is the new oil order a chance for long-delayed justice for long-ignored natives? And what happens to this jungle and the COFAN when Ecuador's own oil company begins new drilling? Chevron versus rainforest Indians, or Bush versus Chavez, whatever you call it, it's just another front in the war over that dark commodity that's left half the world in flames.
Investigative reporter Greg Palast joins us now. You've covered the oil industry worldwide for The Guardian in Britain and for the BBC, and investigated Chevron's polluting the Ecuadorian rainforest for a long time. And this is also a personal story because Chevron has been persecuting you yourself. Is that accurate?
Well, you just saw the report that I put on BBC television, which ran primetime all over the world, except the United States, of course. And so thank you for putting it on the air here. They filed a legal charge against me saying I was biased against them. And so I went through a year of hearings. They kept me off the air. And then the BBC, they have a very formal legal process. There's no First Amendment in Britain. And I was cleared of, you saw me. I gave their lawyers all the time that they wanted. In fact, they even said I'd put up the rest of their statements talking about, hey, kids get cancer. What do you want, man?
Yeah. They made themselves look bad there.
Right. But here's,
you didn't do anything.
So I came out fine, but I'm just the reporter. But then now here's where it goes bad. This is not a happy ending story, guys. So what's happened since I made that film is, yes, the Ecuadorians won their case after years of battle, and they go on $9.5 billion for the victims, and they won for the Chief Criollo and the rest of the native population, the indigenous groups, and they also have to clean up the jungle, but since Chevron left the country and didn't even leave, like I said, even the desk those lawyers are at isn't owned by Chevron, or Texaco, as they say, Chevron and Texaco, one company. So they haven't paid a dime. And worse, they claimed that the lawyers had committed fraud, and which is ridiculous. I've looked at the evidence. No one was ever charged, by the way, with obstruction of justice, when I proved that the company itself, and that was the president of the company, the Presidente de la Junta de Texaco, the head of the company, ordered the destruction of the files. You usually go to jail for that. But who's going to jail? Believe it or not, Stephen Donziger, who is the U.S. lawyer helping the co-fans. He was directing the case from New York. The reason it was in New York is that they try to file in U.S. courts so that Chevron couldn't avoid judgment. Chevron said send it to Ecuador, and then they said the Ecuadorian courts were corrupt, even though they had testified before. It's a terrific court system in Ecuador. Whatever, the important thing is, I just told you, Steve Donziger, the lawyer suing Chevron, not Chevron. Chevron hasn't paid a dime. Rather, they claim that Donziger had committed fraud, had made up this stuff. Well, you can't make up that oil. They didn't pour 10W40 into the jungle and we pick it up. I investigated this thing to a fare thee well. These Chevron poisoned people. Chevron literally killed people. It's that simple. And they got away with it. And they said that Donziger was creating this elaborate fraud. And they found a right-wing judge in New York, a guy named Lewis Kaplan, a judge, to charge Donziger. And not only that, but he told Donziger to turn over to Chevron his computers and his cell phone, to Chevron, to get information about it. Well, they get the names of the insiders, everything. And remember, it's Latin America. You're going to end up with death squads killing his witnesses. He wouldn't turn over his cell phone to Chevron. To the court he would, but not to Chevron. And so they found him. So the judge found him in criminal contempt and said he had to go to prison. This is the lawyer who's a human rights lawyer, like you say, gave up everything. He was a Harvard law graduate. He's broke doing this case, literally bankrupt. And the judge, that's not good enough for the judge. So he went to the Trump administration. He went to the Trump Justice Department, the judge. Sure and they said, and believe it or not, that even the Trump Justice Department said, this is a joke. You're not going to really charge this lawyer with a crime, are you? And so even when the Justice Department under Donald Trump refused to prosecute Steve Donziger, this heroic lawyer. So believe it or not, the judge told Chevron's lawyers to act as the prosecutor in the criminal prosecution of this lawyer. This is the first time in American history, the first time ever, that a private corporation was assigned to prosecute an American citizen, and in this case, the American citizen who is their nemesis. So literally, they got to prosecute their own whistleblower. Plus, so Steve, because he's facing Steve Donziger, because he's facing jail time, asked for a jury trial.
It's in the Constitution. The judge said, no jury trial. Chevron's going to prosecute you.
How is this possible?
And even, I know this is a real serious issue, and I want to know where Merrick Garland is and our current Justice Department, or is it still an Injustice Department? I have to say, and we just did the election story. I haven't seen Garland, Merrick Garland, do a damn thing in either voting or protecting. This is ridiculous what's happening. He should stop this now. But, and on October 1st, now, Steve Donziger will be sentenced by this crazy judge. He could get 6 months in prison. It's crazy. But he's already been, are you ready for this? He's been under house arrest for 2 years. Now, you have to understand, a contempt charge, you should get a fine. Maybe if a judge has peed at you, he will put you in prison for a night. This guy's been under house arrest for 2 years with an ankle bracelet because he defended the indigenous people of Ecuador.
So this is such an interesting case, and it portends negatively for, corporate totalitarianism. If corporations are allowed to prosecute people they don't like, what do you see in the future for this? How can this possibly?
This is horrendous. This never happened in American history. If we let this happen now, I have to say we had senators. We've already had senators, Congress people complain to the Justice Department. 60 Nobel Prize winners have written a letter to President Biden saying, stop this now. I'm still waiting for Biden and the Justice Department to get off their fannies and stop this corporate prosecution. I don't care what you think of the case.
They're probably waiting for us to get off our fannies and push them so that they can have
right.
someone.
So go to
where do we go to be helpful?
freedonziger.com, freedonziger.com.
Donziger.
So Steve and Donziger is Donziger, Donziger. And we want to put the pressure on to stop. This is horrendous. It doesn't even, as Steve said, I'm willing to go to jail. But he says, but that's not the point. How many other human rights lawyers are going to be thrown in jail? This is, it's like we're in Kazakhstan.
It's not just human rights lawyers. They'll start with the human rights lawyers, and then they'll, if you don't want a pipeline coming through your backyard, then you're you know what I mean? This is.
Oh, and by the way, they also chased, Chevron and its buddies were able to get rid of the president of Ecuador. They basically, manipulated the system there, and they're trying to actually charge the former president. Mm-hmm. Rafael Correa, who was, by the way, spent most of his time as an economics professor in the U.S., very straight, honest guy. No one's ever said anything else. And so they're going after everyone. They went after me. They went after the president of Ecuador. But worse, they're putting a human rights lawyer is facing prison time. It's really, I don't know.
And this guy is classmates with Barack Obama. Is Barack Obama helping at all?
I think he just had his birthday party with Beyonce. And so, you don't want to he's doing important things now.
Yes. Okay, so I would like to talk a little bit about the case that was won in Ecuador.
Yes.
And then, because it's very interesting. The last I've heard, it went to The Hague. But before that, the U.S. Supreme Court actually rejected an injunction against that judgment that was punishing Chevron. This is in 2012 when we had a different configuration on the U.S. Supreme Court, which basically said that Chevron would have to assume liability and pay damages. And then Chevron,
it's called the rule of law. It's called rule of law. They created damage. People died. And so you pay. Even, look, the stuff we saw in Ecuador, you have to understand, there's no question that they would have gone to jail if they did that in the U.S. No question, none. Even Chevron.
That's what I was going to say. Even Chevron. I mean, well, that's good to know that we still have some law that would help with that. But so then the District Court of The Hague on September 16th, 2020, ruled in favor of Chevron in its dispute with Ecuador. It upheld a 2018 arbitral award that was rendered by an international tribunal. Now, when I'm reading through what this says, what happened at The Hague, what really stuck out for me was how the court's ruling followed decision from courts in Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Gibraltar, and somewhere in the U.S. that rejected the fraudulent Ecuadorian judgment against Chevron and Argentina's highest court. So they have their fingers everywhere. Am I right?
So what they did was that they went to these, to fascist and dictatorial regimes and got rulings that Chevron doesn't have to pay. It doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't guilty of killing people or destroying the rainforest. What they said, oh, they don't have, you can't collect on them. All you could do is collect in Ecuador. And as I said, they didn't, as they told me, they didn't leave a napkin in Ecuador to seize. So that's what it's all about. It's like, because the corporate world and the corporate legal world is panicked that if you kill people in the third world and then you try to collect in California where Chevron is based, that's dangerous. In other words, we can create any damage we want in low-income nations, in indigenous communities, and they're out of luck if they try to actually collect. You can get all the court judgments you want, but you're out of luck if you try to collect. And in fact, we're going to figure out a way to put your lawyers in prison.
This is really interesting in general, and I think it has to do kind of with the internet and the media landscape, because when all of this stuff was happening in third world countries and the media was closed door, you know, there were gatekeepers keeping information out, only covering things that were friendly to corporate media, shall we say. You couldn't really even get this information, but now that people are seeing that people are dying in Ecuador, they were being poisoned in Ecuador, they're probably still being poisoned in Ecuador. People care about that and they want to see justice. So you can't just kind of hide your dirty murders for oil in the same way that you could before.
Well, I have to say that one of the problems I ran into, well, I will say I want to credit 60 Minutes. They took my story, they basically refilmed the entire thing frame for frame, except for one thing. They left out the part where Chevron, they didn't have Chevron's lawyers like I did. But what they left out, I was very disappointed, is that they left out the documents I showed that said destroy the evidence, which is obstruction of justice. But I'll give 60 Minutes at least credit that they touched the story. But then there was,
I don't agree, Greg. I think they put the story in there and they took the teeth out of it. Meaning,
they took the teeth out.
Look, we covered the story, but they did a total disservice. It's like going to
but let me tell you, now it gets worse. So then Chevron started threatening everyone. They used me as an example. Look, we went after Palast. And so no one else would cover the story. And in particular, and here's where it gets ugly. In particular, they went after the PBS had the right to our film. We offered it to PBS and they wouldn't touch it. And then I said to them, I looked at the website of the PBS NewsHour. Yeah. And right above it says PBS NewsHour, but right above it in bigger letters, it says Chevron with the Chevron logo. So Chevron was the #1 corporate sponsor of the supposed public broadcasting system, but it isn't. Literally, the NewsHour is owned by Chevron. It's really the petroleum broadcast system. Right. And so the petroleum broadcast system would not even touch the story, would not mention it. In fact, I did another story out of, again, run in Britain, not in America, about the Deepwater Horizon. And I noted that Chevron was deeply involved in you go to gregpalast.com and get the story, but Chevron knew that just before the Deepwater Horizon exploded, that there was an identical explosion at a Chevron BP Exxon combo oil rig in the Caspian Sea, and they covered this up. This is a massive crime. We would never have drilled in the Gulf if we knew that same rig, that same replica, that same rig had blown up just months before, just 17 months before in the Caspian. Now, we could not get that on US TV. It was all over the world prime time, not in the United States. And believe me, instead, PBS ran the story that while the Deepwater Horizon blew up because, BP just didn't have a good safety culture. Like they don't, it's cultural. They don't wear gloves at the opera or something. But they actually had the president of Chevron on. This is the guy who covered up, who had personal knowledge of the prior blowout, who covered it up. And PBS put on the president of Chevron, their #1 sponsor, by the way, without saying that he's paying for this show. Mm-hmm. They put him on to say, oh, Chevron would never create environmental damage. Really? I was just in Ecuador. Look at those pictures in Ecuador.
It's the same as what's going on with GE. I mean, the meltdown of the nuclear power plants, Fukushima, it's the same power plant that we have all over the place in the world.
Yes, in fact, I was an investigator for the state of New York on investigating these nuclear power plants. And again, so you had GE, and we couldn't get anything on NBC. It was owned by GE. The great Mike Taibbi, father of Matt Taibbi, did an investigative piece with me for CBS. Though that will never happen again, I'm going to tell you that right now. But again, so they've learned how to buy up the judges, the media, and unfortunately, even some green groups here and there are really just, well, it's just like BP painted all its gas stations green, and they use the phrase beyond petroleum. Well, once again,
well, you're filling up your car with petroleum. They're like,
well, you can't go beyond petroleum with your SUV. So look, so we do have the media, the American mainstream media. This is why they are discredited. I had to understand remember to do this story in Ecuador about a U.S. company. I had to go to BBC television to do the story about the Deepwater Horizon. I had to go to British television. I had to go to European television on a network called Arte. But you can't get this stuff into the U.S. media, well, except for your wonderful program. And I think that, by the way, you're not paying me to do this, but I'm going to say it. People should really understand how rare and important and amazing this program is, because it's getting you the hard, good stuff you just can't get anywhere else on the lame stream.
Thank you so much, Greg. We really appreciate that. And I appreciate your time coming on here talking about these stories. I know you have a tight schedule today, so I'll let you go. Go to gregpalast.com. Go to gregpalast.com, find out all of what Greg is working on, and you can find out how to support Steve Donziger's freedom, right?
And our freedom. Yes.
Our freedom too. Thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye.
You're watching ACT TV. I'm Juliana Forlano. Follow ACT TV across platforms and tell your friends about it, and leave a comment, because that helps us. You can also even make suggestions on who you'd like to see, what activists, what journalists, what stories you'd like to see covered on our program. I do take a look. I do take a read, and pretty soon it looks like we might even have a way for you to contact us while we're on the show, and we can have a chat with you. So keep watching. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.